So folks, welcome for the session today. And today we're going to kick off one of our really important strategic thrust of the competition beyond the technology, and that is looking at how do you get these prototypes to market. And so throughout the competition, we're going to be offering services to the teams and escalating those more in later phases. But we want to get started now by starting to have you think about, what does it mean to bring this product to market? What does it mean to move beyond just experimental prototyping? And so each of you, that may be a different answer. Some of you may already have a company, may even have a product on the market already. Others of you may be in parallel markets, and this is your first foray into the first responder space. Others may decide you're going to develop something and sell it or license it to an established vendor in the space. Each team will have a different answer, and there's no right answer for this. And so what we're trying to do with the competition is provide you the resources and support to start thinking through that. And so we'll have a varied program as we go forward. And so I wanted to start out today and introduce you to our primary partner for commercialization support, genor8tor. And Elise is with us today, and she'll tell us a little bit about herself and the program that they're going to offer later in the program and later phases of the competition, as well as services we might be able to offer as we start out the competition. So Elise, I'll turn it over to you and you can take it from here.
Thanks, Sunny. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. My name is Elise. I am a G-Beta Indiana director. So I direct some pre-accelerator programming that we run here across the state of Indiana for really early stage startups. And we have really just a host of programming platforms that we offer to invest in local startup ecosystems, especially across the Midwest. I'll go ahead and share my screen here real quick so we can see my presentation. And I think Haley's moderating, but Haley, at any point, if anyone has any questions or raise their hand, feel free to stop me. If not, we might have a couple seconds or a couple minutes at the end as well that I'm happy to answer any questions. But today, oh, sorry. Perfect.
Oh, I was going to say, sounds good.
Perfect. Thank you. Today, I'm just have a little bit to share with you about kind of intro to commercialization topics, like Sunny just mentioned, thinking of practices that we think of when we think of taking an early stage idea and making it a viable business model as well. So this concept of MVP, and then taking that to the investment process and what that looks like. So just some basic concepts that I think will be a good introduction to how we think in the startup world and in accelerator worlds here. And I think that'd be a good platform for us jumping off into the partnership going forward. And I know that's really going to start off in the next phase, but genor8tor is excited to work with IU on this kind of on a monthly basis, working with teams on topics related to commercialization and market research, testing your product, features, roadmap, a lot of different topics that we'll be working with you both in presentation styles like this, as well as one-on-one kind of opportunities as well. And I personally am actually a little bit connected to this idea as well. So I come from a family of first responders. So it's a personal connection as well, which I'm really excited that I get to be involved with this. So I'll go ahead and start off with my presentation here. Again, thinking of taking a MVP to an investment, and I will define those concepts as well. So right off the bat, something that we talk about whenever we talk about commercialization is a minimum viable product. And in the startup world, it's a very important concept for developing a product that both solves a problem that you face personally, but is also something that customers are going to be willing to pay for, instead of necessarily defining a fantastic solution that you're really excited about, but that there really may not be a need for in the market. And that's going to be your really primary indicator of whether you have a commercially viable product. So one way that we do that in a way that is efficient with resources is to create the minimum viable product. So that's what MVP stands for, and that's what I'll be referencing throughout this presentation. I have a little bit of a visual idea to demonstrate that first. But we are looking at a minimum viable product as a version of your product with enough features to attract kind of early adopters, validate your product idea really early on, test any ideas or assumptions that you have, including price and usability features, and maybe even build a roadmap to what that future product may look like. So anything where we're undermining the assumption that, okay, if I build it, the customers will come, because that's not always true. So this is a slide of donuts. This is something that might be the final version of your product that you want to offer, with lots of different features, different tastes in this case, lots of different ways for the customer to choose what they want and don't want. This would be the finished product. And so this is the very end stages after you've done kind of this MVP development. So instead, we're going to start with the basic concept, which is just a plain glazed donut in this metaphor, to validate that, will a customer even be receptive to an idea of fried dough in this case? Because if they don't like that idea, then they're not going to like all of the iced and variations of this idea. So we have to start with a very basic concept first. And then eventually, once we've gotten feedback for that very first iteration of our product, in this case, the glazed donut, we can then add frosting and sprinkles and everything that make our product what we were envisioning it to be in the fullest sense of the word. I hope that helps a little bit as far as describing how that relationship starts. But talking about when it is appropriate to start and build an MVP, or when it is appropriate to start commercializing your product. You're going to think about anytime a founder or anyone like yourselves, competitors in this program, may have a solution or a product and you're really excited about it, but there may not be evidence that it solves a real need or people want it. You haven't gotten that evidence yet. It's just an idea, kind of back of the notepad type ideas at the moment. I got a question in the chat. Sorry, I'll come back to that. Also, you think about, you might have a good idea for the company. You want to test the demand in that market. You may not also have the resources to build the solution you have in mind at first. So that's a really good time to think about developing an MVP. Or anytime you want to work on something without dedicating significant resources to building out that company. Again, thinking of saving as much time and resources as possible, so that you know what you build is going to work and that it's going to sell. Why this is important. I, again, would like to draw an analogy here to help explain this concept, but many founders often spend a lot of time, money, or other resources building out features that customers might not want, that I've already hinted at. And so it's really important to get customer feedback early and often. If you're not building your company based on feedback every step of the way throughout any step of the commercialization process, you are often building blind. An example of kind of what we don't want to do in startup world and for you building your product can be relatable to NASA. In a little bit different side of the coin, they're not a lean startup. They are building, or they built solutions that had to be perfect every single time. They couldn't be scrappy or kind of experiments. When they sent a rocket up, it had to work every single time to protect the lives that they're working with. And while many of the technologies that they worked with were commercialized after use, their primary purpose, was not purely commercialization and to be sold directly to customers. And as we know, NASA became very infamous for red tape, inefficiencies, government oversight, and just astronomically expensive processes, which doesn't work for founders like you and me that are trying to build something from scratch with very little resources. And so to come up with something that is viable and that works, you have to find a way to build your product without the inefficiencies, the astronomically expensive processes, and still come up with something that both works and is in demand by the market. With that being said, research is very important. And so I think often people can equate an MVP to just building something without researching first, but you still need to test something in the market that you've done your research on. And so research is something that you can do for free. I consider that part of this lean startup method, doing that research and then getting customer feedback every step of the way. Taking a look at this question. Yes, Michael, I will get to that question at the end. All right. how we measure kind of the MVP process. We refer to this as an build, measure, learn feedback loop for this process of building your MVP. When you do this process several times, you'll be able to test each of your assumptions or hypotheses that you make while building your company, and you can thus build in a very much more informed, lean way. So first you build the very first basic glazed donut, then you measure the customer feedback on that, and then you iterate after that and do that repeatedly for each piece of the product that you're building on. And from a financing angle, the goal of the game here is to really prove that even with low working capital, you can get a 3 to 5 times markup on the next round. As in, every time you may be raising fundraising or approaching a stakeholder, you want to prove that you're growing significantly throughout each stage so that you're not a risky partnership or investment. In some cases, having lower working capital to build your product is less of a risk for whatever that stakeholder may be to work with you. Getting started on commercializing your idea, your MVP, you really just have to get boots on the ground and just start. First, you want to identify the assumptions that you're making about your company. So for example, the assumption that you have a problem, that problem is personal to you and it exists, but you're also assuming that people will pay to have that problem solved. You're assuming how much they will pay to solve that problem, and you're assuming what type of feature sets they want. You're assuming that you have little to no money, and this assumption will be custom based on every company, but in general, we want you to be ready to get creative. Think about designing mini tests for each of your assumptions by using the bubblegum and duct tape methods that I've shown so vividly here, or any scrappy method to use your existing resources before building out kind of custom solutions for every customer. I think as a rule of thumb, if you're not a little embarrassed by your MVP or your first product, you probably aren't asking for feedback soon enough. There may be features that you didn't even think about that the customer may need that may lead you down an entire new value opportunity to build into your product or your company. Also, you still want to do your research. You can read up on how other companies, and especially businesses with products or models that are very similar to yours, and see how they've done it in the past. The resource that really most of this presentation is built off of, that we refer to all the time throughout generator programming, is the Lean Startup by Eric Rice. But consider that it's not necessarily a to-do manual. Nothing is elegant or scientific in real life. Real life is much more hairy, but those are guiding principles to be considering as you're working on commercializing your ideas. Again, I'll say this again and again, test as much as possible, because just like companies like yours might exist and might do what they're doing well, it doesn't mean that yours will too. So you need feedback early and often. As soon as possible. Yes, Sunny.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on that. The competitors out of phase 2, which is due in a couple of weeks, the competitors who win phase 2 will have available $5,000 of travel funds to go to the PSCR conference. PSCR is the funding source for the competition. They have an annual stakeholder event, generally around 400 folks in attendance, all stakeholders who have an interest in this type of product. And so as part of that attendance, they will have the ability to have a poster demonstration area where they can interact with stakeholders. And one of the things you said was, if you're not embarrassed about your product, that when you start talking to people, you're too late. So I encourage folks to show up, even if you're early in the process. It doesn't look pretty. You haven't figured it all out, because one of the reasons we're doing this is to give you a chance to get in front of those customers, stakeholders, investors, partners, sales distribution channel folks. There's all types of people who will be there who may be able to help you advance your prototype. And so we'll be sending out a poll on this on Friday to get a preliminary view of how many of the potential competitors for phase 2 are planning to show up, so we have enough space allocated for you to be able to show off what you have and to engage with these folks. So that's an early opportunity that we'll be providing this right in line with what Elise is talking about.
That's so helpful. Thank you, Sunny. Yeah, that's a great opportunity to apply these concepts right away, which is fantastic. And often I think you'll be surprised by the good feedback that you do get, even if you are a little embarrassed by it at first, and kind of see what other opportunities the customer sees
Yeah.
or people interacting with your product sees that you didn't think about at first as well. So
Exactly. And that event is June 7th through 9th in San Diego. And so just so folks know the timing of it. So be sure and go and take a look at that opportunity to do that. And one of the people I like to quote at least is Guy Kawasaki. Been reading his stuff for years, and he in one of his earlier books, he always said nobody ever apologizes for version 1.
yes,
And the thinking there is you got to put it out at some point, and you shouldn't apologize for version beta or alpha 1, certainly. And so really be brave for those folks who don't feel like you're far enough along, and go out there and engage with these people at this event. It's a great event, and we worked hard to give this opportunity to teams because we think it's that important.
Thanks, Sunny. Yeah, I think kind of finishing up this slide before I move on, the more you can test early, often, and wrap analytics around that, the better. I think the more a founder claims their solution is that much better than the status quo, the more your minimum MVP needs to be to just beat that status quo and get people paying for it and prove that you are correct. You really just want to view it from the customer's problem rather than your vision, and really open up as many vantage points as possible to monetize. So yeah, that'll be a perfect opportunity to do that. I have a couple examples of what this may look like because it can be different when you're conceptualizing it for different industries, different markets. So hopefully this will help. One way that you can think about testing early and often is delivering the end product to several customers without building out any of the necessary systems, partnerships, or infrastructure that you envision down the road. A good example of this is this company called Men's Style Lab. You can kind of think of, if you heard of Trunk Club, it's like Trunk Club at a lower price point, but pretty much they looked to create a club for men and fashion, and they worked first by just collecting email addresses and phone numbers of men that might be interested in this service to deliver outfits, full clothing, closets right to their door. They called them to see what kind of clothes they'd be interested in delivering. And then those founders went to outlet malls, shopped, did all of that for them, and then just sent it to them, necessarily without having any of the infrastructure built up with any of these retailers or suppliers. They just did the shopping themselves. So that's an example of doing the work without necessarily the infrastructure that they were envisioning long term. Another good example is you can just start selling now, anything that you might be able to get in front of the customer. This company is called Replenish. If you have a Keurig at home, almost think about Keurig for smoothies. This machine that you see in this picture had a very long engineering process, as you can imagine. But this company started by simply delivering pre-made smoothies to office spaces, which ramped up tens of thousands of dollars a week in sales. And then they could use that funding to build out relationships with customers, suppliers, channel partners, and get the necessary R&D paid for that they needed to make this machine. So now they already have all the infrastructure in place. Once they do actually create their envisioned solution and make this Keurig for smoothies that really they sell in the B2B world for office spaces, which that kind of makes me hungry just looking at it, but a great example. And finally, this example, this company is called Genor8tor. And what they do is they use artificial intelligence to scrape public meeting minutes, and then deliver kind of those leads through those meeting minutes to general contractors. So thinking about the needs expressed in those public meetings that contractors could then help fill. That uses a very complicated AI engine, but before this was built out, they did all of the scraping and all this analyzing much more manually, just to prove that contractors would pay for this solution. And then once they proved that, yeah, the contractor wants this, then they were able to start actually building out that AI capability. So those are a couple examples. I have a couple tips and tricks to help get you started. But first off, make a splash page about your idea, whatever you're working on, no matter how early you are, whether this is a website, this is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, if that fits for your solution. Make a splash page and just see how many people you can start getting engaged. That's always a good way to start. Surveys don't count, but revenue does. Something that can be hard to digest at first. Often we'll think about, oh, well, I'll take customer surveys and people will tell me what they want, which is great. Getting those customer conversations is an early form of this feedback that we're talking about. But sometimes the customer, as you may identify with, may have biases, may not actually know what they want in the moment, but their buying habits show what they do really want. So revenue does. If you're able to monetize any piece of what you're working on consistently, that means you're going for gold. So just try to sell that MVP. If no one's buying it, figure out why, fix it, even if it's different than what you thought at first. You can also find a lower maintenance customer. I think a good example of this would even be this, that Keurig for smoothies company I just mentioned, where they were able to satisfy initial customers with just pre-made smoothies delivered to the office instead of the necessity of the entire built-out machine. And that customer then was already in the pipeline when they were ready. And again, just start, just try to sell and see what happens. It will be okay. You'll learn a lot, you'll iterate much more quickly, and you'll use the resources that you have much more efficiently. To recap, this is really a process. You first have to identify your opportunity, which many of you may have done, having gotten to this point and being interested in this challenge. You have an opportunity in mind. You have to hypothesize the solution, which in turn comes with making assumptions about what the customer's problem is. Is it the same as yours? Are there other problems related? How much are they willing to pay for it? How frequently? What do they currently use to solve this problem? And based on that research, you then can create your MVP, minimum viable product, with emphasis on the minimum. Think about deploying that as soon as you can, and then observe and learn based on responses to that MVP. How are people interacting with it? What do they love? What do they not love? Then you can adjust and create a new version. You can iterate. And then that will give you the opportunity to scale using, again, the resources that you have very efficiently. And instead of bringing a beautiful solution to market that you're so excited about, but that doesn't land. And what now? Okay, you have a prototype. Congratulations, you've made a thing. Now what? I think this is kind of the next step in that commercialization process. You've gotten that MVP, that prototype. You've iterated a little bit, you've gotten customer feedback, but you really need to make it bigger. You need to bring it to the entire market. What do you do now? And there's kind of a choose your own adventure path here. So you can either bootstrap or seek investment to make that dream a reality. They both have pros and cons. Bootstrapping, you retain all of your ownership and future profits. If you can bootstrap, great. On the VC side of the world, obviously, we like to invest because it's a win-win for everybody. But I always like to tell founders, if you can bootstrap, do it. Absolutely. But you will experience slower growth and may have a smaller final payout. So think a smaller pie in the end. If you seek investment, you can fund faster growth and likely a bigger payment for both you and your investors. But you share that final payout with your investors as well. And this could be a pro or a con. Those investors may get a seat at the table in the decision-making processes of the company. So kind of bottom line here, it takes money to make money. There are lots of options for you. With bootstrapping, you can always seek loans, which are more familiar, straightforward from a bank. You might have interest. Often they won't lend to startups. So if you need external investment, that gets really risky for them. And this is where kind of investment comes in. And let's see, in general, I like to think about that pie scenario: bootstrapping, smaller pie; investment, bigger pie, and it just depends on what your values are. I mentioned this. Oh, this is my other resource. Eric Rice, Lean Startup, is the first resource that I mentioned earlier in the slides. But this is another resource as we get to talking about investment side of your commercialization process that I highly, highly recommend. It's called Venture Deals. They have an entire landing page with resources and legal templates that you can look through, and it is so helpful to understanding kind of what that side of the world looks like and how to interact with investment partners you may be seeking. And to seek that investment, you need more than just your cool product. You also need matching math, and you need to de-risk that investment. And I'll explain what that means. Even if you have raised a little bit of money to get there from friends or family, once you start pitching to professional investors and venture capitalists, you're going to need more than just that cool product. You really need to show that your math matches the investor's math. So that's what I mean by matching math. And you also need to de-risk that investment, which could be as simple as, well, I'll keep going there. This will be a very, very short and sweet explanation. We'll dive a lot deeper into this through the future content that we'll be working on through this challenge as well. So stay tuned. For the high level overview though, one of the reasons that startups struggle to raise money is they don't really understand the perspective of investors, which leads them to focus on the wrong things when pitching and assuming that maybe the investor is a jerk or you just don't get it when I say no, which isn't always the case. Personalities, energy certainly play a role. You also need to make the case that your company is the best chance for them to make money, so what they're doing professionally, relative to the next best opportunity. So in order to make that case, you need to first understand how the investors make money. I'll walk you through this a little bit. They need to know the numbers that you're working with in your pitch, and particularly thinking of market analysis and opportunity. So let me walk through that with you. There's typically two ways to do that market analysis opportunity, listed here as bottom up or top down market analysis. In my experience, investors generally prefer to see the bottom up analysis because those numbers tend to be more rooted in reality than just a wild guess. When you're coming at it from more of an academic side of things, it may be easy to go on Google and just look up the size of the cocoa market based on all the databases that we have access to, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper than that. So instead of telling investors, our US fitness market is currently valued at 37 billion. And if we gain 1% of that market, our market is 370 million. The problem there is that you're most likely not targeting the entire fitness market, but probably just a segment of it. And that 1% is just a wild guess, not really rooted in reality. So instead, it's better to do more research and present the bottom up analysis listed below, such as we are targeting approximately 20 million female gym members ages 20 to 65 in the US in 2021. You can see very specific slices of a market taken there. And then multiply that by our $100 annual subscription rate, you get a target addressable market of 2 billion, which is fantastic. You can kind of see where that math comes in rather than just an estimation of the market size. And that requires much more research, but that's what makes it better and more meaningful. And generally you want that target addressable market, or this TAM here, to be at least $1 billion when pitching. And if it's not, you can think about how to adjust your market size, maybe target both male and female gym members in this example, or potentially increase your price. But at the end of the day, the TAM has to be big enough for the fund that you're pitching to be interested in it. Otherwise, you might need to seek a different professional investor. They are out there, keep looking. So besides that matching math, kind of the market opportunity size of commercializing your product, you also need to de-risk the investment for those stakeholders whenever possible. Investors hear pie in the sky, big, exciting dreams all the time, and they need to see actual evidence that the customer wants what you're offering, which you should have already been working on in your MVP development by getting customer feedback early and often. If you've sold to even just one customer, you've really crossed a significant hurdle for a lot of startups, and investors notice that. From there, you should focus on selling reliably, then at scale, and then and only then at margin. And I will note that this may be a little bit different than if you choose a bootstrapping path. In that path, you might need to optimize for margin sooner because you don't have any outside capital coming in to fund your development and your operations. But for the investment path, traction, customer feedback is much more important than margin, especially in the early stages that you all are experiencing right now. Many of you, I'm assuming at least. And that's why companies like DoorDash were super affordable at first. For an example, now that they've proven that they can get customers, and a lot of customers, and those customers want and will pay for the service, they can increase their prices and boost their margins after they've proven that they have something the market wants. And finally, it's important for founders, especially technology types, so kind of any of this technology that you're working on in this space, to remember that your product won't be perfect, and that is okay. Hate to break it to you, no product is perfect. Don't let it stop you from getting in front of people and asking for feedback and from selling. We tell people all the time, as I mentioned earlier, go ahead, duct tape and bubble gum it, put it together so you can sell it. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to be embarrassing. That's okay. Get the feedback, fix the bugs, pivot when you need to, sell some more, repeat. That's the big process there. I think we might remember when Amazon only sold books. That was their minimum viable product, a online bookstore. And then they took that, validated it, and just grew and keep growing. So if you spend ages perfecting that product with a long list of features and only to learn that your customers want an entirely different set of features, you've wasted a lot of time, resources, and it can be more difficult to pivot from there. Grab a sip of water real quick.
I had a question for clarity. You may be going to get to this later, but so just wait till the end. So you've mentioned like venture investors. What about corporate investors? In this space, there are a lot of dominant players in the first responder space in terms of technology companies and folks who sell into it. Do you have any tips or advice in terms of like approaching those folks who might invest in startups that they might want to co-market with or even acquire, things like that? Are there any?
Yeah, I will say with corporate investors, that's actually one thing that we work with through our what we call our on-ramp conferences. We connect corporate investors to startups in matching industries that might be good matches. And all of this kind of goals and values still apply as far as they need to be able to validate that there is a market opportunity for what you're working on. As I mentioned with that matching math, they need to be able to validate that. And you also need to de-risk your investment because if anything, they have just as much risk, if not more, because they answer to an entire corporation as well. They're often going to be willing to take on less risk. With a venture capital firm, like their job is to take on risky investments, and it is understood that only a very small fraction, like 5% of those investments are going to be successful. With a corporate innovation group, they're going to need to make more successful investments to continue being in operation because they're answering to that bigger, larger corporation. So if anything, these concepts apply even more. And often you might see that kind of corporate innovation groups, corporate investors might invest at a little bit later stage than a venture capital fund would to do that. At least from my experience, there are always outliers to the rule. But from my experience, those corporate investors might want to see more traction, might want to see a seed round done. Or if you're bootstrapping, great. And they're also going to need to see that your product or your solution is obviously in line with their company or the markets that they want to go into. I hope that helps, and we can go into that later more as well.
There are a couple of questions in the Q&A. You see those?
Yeah, I gotta open it. Sorry, guys. Thanks for that shout out, Sunny. Let's see. Yep, Michael, I'm going to answer that one at the end since it's a larger question. But the second question, what is the expectation on venture capital for revenue, say in 3 to 5 years? Do you show 100 million traction in a few years, say to get to 3 to 5 million? That is a great question. I wouldn't say 100 million for kind of early 3 to 5 years. I don't want to give you an incorrect answer because it is a very subjective industry and there are venture capital firms for almost everything now. So there are venture capitalists, angels that have very different theses or definitions of who they invest in and why. But I mentioned that 3 to 5 times markup. So if you're pitching for a smaller venture capital firm that is primarily interested in, the value, if they invest in underrepresented founders that work on solutions for public benefit, they might take startups with smaller early revenue, say $1 million maybe. But often that might not even be in the first year. We work with a lot of startups in our accelerator programs that don't make $1 million of revenue in their first year. But the general rule of thumb that I think is a better measure is that 3 to 5 times markup between each round of capital raise. So you need to just show that you're making progress. So if you have $1 million of revenue, then you raise some friends and family money to help you get to the next step. The next time you approach investors, you need to show that your revenue is at 3 to 5 million if you started at 1 million. So I hope that helps. I think that is more generally acceptable across the board than necessarily a standard sticker price for every company. Cool. Okay. Tracking and sharing progress. And I got about 20 minutes. I see still have a couple of slides, but there'll be time for questions at the end as well. Another tip that we like to give new founders is to track your customer relationships. And this is part of that de-risking your investment for stakeholders and investors. Whether it's kind of using a fancy CRM software, if you've heard of HubSpot, that's a great one. Or if it's just using a simple spreadsheet. I know a lot of companies now that are using Airtable. That's a great, more online format of spreadsheets if you haven't used that yet. I hear a lot that, oh my goodness, I've got everybody in my head trying to keep track of everybody at once. And if you're doing it right, that won't work for long because you're going to be wanting to meet as many people as possible and maintaining those relationships with them. It takes a village to start and bring a company to fruition. And you're going to need that social capital 100 times over. And so you need to get in a habit of keeping track of those relationships somewhere that's real and keeping them organized before you end up in a very tangled, very complicated mess. Just start by putting 2 or 3 customers or customer conversations you've had, maybe potential stakeholders, potential partners, just into a spreadsheet, and you'll be very glad that you did that. Another tip, tracking meaningful metrics. When you're in communications with these people that are now in your spreadsheet, because you've done your job and you've added them just like I told you to, you're going to want to communicate metrics to them that matter. It's easy for startups, especially in early stages of traction when it's hard to know what to track things that just look good, particularly things that look good internally and make you feel better about yourself. We like to call those vanity metrics because if I dig into them, they're meaningless. An investor worth their salt will be able to see that as well. Instead, aim for something tangible. A very common rule of thumb that works across the board is aiming for 20% month-over-month growth. Ideally, that's in sales. But you can also use a proxy for sales if you're not there yet. Maybe that's social media engagement or website traffic. Maybe it's pre-orders. That's a great way to sell before you have product, pre-orders. Maybe it's a customer pipeline. Anything that might really move you forward and show that you are making progress, and you can back that up. A quick example here that I think that impact really lands. The difference between 10% month-over-month growth and 20% month-over-month growth is very significant. If you started with $100 in sales in month 1, at a 10% month-over-month growth, you'll be earning about $21K every month after 3 years of growth. Whereas if you focus on 20% month-over-month growth for that same time period, you'd be up to about $314K. So simple, like logarithmic math. Those are really tangible differences. And that 20% month-over-month growth is something that investors look for. Also, in this kind of communication trend, I like to encourage founders to send out monthly updates to a friends of the company list. Speaking of those metrics that we just asked for, you can include your friends, family, current potential investors, customers, any type of stakeholder. You can include on your monthly update things like milestones, metrics, highlights, progress, ask for help, those metrics that you're tracking that you're showing you're growing, anything that you can do to keep people in the loop so that when something comes up, oh, I know someone in this space that would be perfect for them. They'll be able to have the opportunity to make that connection for you. Definitely go ahead and be transparent about things that are hard right now. Ask for help. I think that transparency is something that people really appreciate, especially in the entrepreneur ecosystem, in the startup world, when it's easy, again, for people to only report on things that look good. It's a hard job that you're doing, and be honest about that. You'll be surprised on who offers their support in a response. And doing this regularly shows that you're still working hard, that you're still working progress, even if it's slow, that you're still in operations. If not, it can be easy to assume that companies that disappear kind of aren't tracking their progress, they've given up, they've closed their doors, and you don't want your supporters to assume that about you. So every time you're making those reach outs, adding people to your CRM spreadsheet, you can say, would you be open to receiving a monthly update from our company? They can be really fun to read through. Just keep them updated and keep yourself accessible, keep yourself accountable as well. Accountability is a really big thing that I think programs like genor8tor and other accelerator programs really add to the puzzle as an entrepreneur. Another thing, obsessively follow your competition. You may think that having no competition is a good thing, but it's actually a huge red flag if you pitch to an investor and you say you have no competition, or if you're in kind of the top right hand of a competition chart with nobody else up there. It shows that you probably haven't really thought through the market space that you're entering fully, because everyone has competition and it might just be the status quo, kind of the closest thing that people are using to solve a problem similar to yours. It might be different, it might be a new space, but there is something that people are doing instead of using your product. Think about what those potential customers are doing instead. Maybe it's as simple as pen and paper instead of a laptop. Great. How is your product better than that status quo? And showing the investor that you have competition is normally a good thing. It shows that there's someone doing something similar in the space and it's working for them. And it has the potential to work for you, but you'll be doing it better, of course. Think about just following them really, really closely, obsessively. You should be an expert in whatever your competition is doing. Can't say it enough. Set up Google alerts, hear about them in the news, follow them on social media, subscribe to their newsletters, often give you good ideas of maybe ways that they automate their processes that might work for your industry as well. Fantastic. And I think that's all I have to say about that. A couple of resources that I have here. I mentioned Lean Startup by Eric Rice. I also mentioned earlier Venture Deals. They have a website and a book written by a venture capital investor and a lawyer, an attorney. Really, really helpful, both of those. These links are a couple additional resources, blogs that you can go over some of the material that I've talked about today. And Sunny and Haley, I'd be happy to send along this presentation so we can make it available with the recording of this, this presentation as well. All right, cool. That was the entirety of that presentation, and I hope it's been helpful as far as thinking about how to take the idea that you're working on and start thinking about commercialization and what that looks like, how to kind of find that cadence. I know I did have a question that I've been promising to answer, Michael. Thank you for your patience. He says, I understand that genor8tor will be facilitating a 5G cohort in Indianapolis this spring. My company was accepted, but I deferred in order to participate fully. Would intros to 5G providers be available within this program? Great question, Michael. Yeah, I know the 5G cohort is kicking off really next week. I assume that we'll be able to make as many intros as possible for you. That's our job as an accelerator, is to really build that network for our entrepreneurs that we work with, including all of the entrepreneurs going through this first challenge. Very excited about it. I know at that point, kind of when we move into phase 3, we'll be working on a couple other programs, but we of course maintain those relationships just like we advise startups to do. And so we always try to make whatever connections that we can in that space. I will stipulate that there may be a couple service providers that have committed or sponsored our programs and only operate within the space of that cohort. But any connections we can make outside of that, we will. I hope that's helpful. Well, great. If there are any other questions, I can hang out for a minute. I know we had until 4. But I will definitely pass along this presentation so you can follow those resource links that I mentioned as well when you're watching this. And my email is on this first slide as well. And I know that we are going to be hosting kind of bi-weekly or weekly office hours, open office hours for all the first challenge participants. And so that information, we'll make sure we get that out to everyone and that it's available so that you guys can start asking questions, getting feedback on what you're working on. Excited to hear about this event that Sunny mentioned, for you to get some early customer feedback. That sounds like an amazing opportunity. Please do that. And then I know once kind of the next phase starts, we'll be ramping up the commercialization side of our programming, including lunch and learns and mentor opportunities, one-on-one team meetings as well. I think one of the first topics we'll be covering is actually going to be Legal 101. As you think about all of the implications of commercializing and potentially raising capital, raising investment, those things that you need to be considering as due diligence processes as well. So little sneak peek preview there. I think that's what we'll be covering first. But we're really, really excited to start to get to know everyone.
Thank you, Elise. Are there any other questions folks have? Please post them. One of the things I'll say is, from my perspective, certainly there'll be people who don't know about anything about the first responder market, but if you're engaging with an industry, someone who's in the first responder industry or an investor who focuses on these types of markets, one of the things we're pretty confident about is this is a key problem these teams are solving. And so this has been identified by multiple groups, and the NIST group that's funding this work, they did research and said this is like the holy grail for fire service to solve this indoor tracking problem. It's a huge issue. So luckily, I think the competitors who do go out there and seek industry partnerships, investors, things like that, will find that they don't have to really sell the problem. It's a known huge issue. What they'll have to sell us, do they have a viable approach to solving the problem? And one of the things, at least I don't know that I've actually shared this with you, but we've kind of set a goal, a competition goal for ourselves in terms of what we're asking the competitors to do by the end of the competition, by the end of phase 5. And that is to demonstrate indoor localization and tracking of first responders within 1 meter accuracy. This is what came out of NIST research into what's the gold standard of what we need to be on the X, Y, Z axis, 1 meter accuracy in a variety of different buildings and structures without pre-deployed infrastructure. And what we mean by marketable prototypes are they're robust for first responder use cases, scalable across diverse organizations and communities, and affordable for first responders. And that statement was created. What does it mean to have a market viable product? How are you really going to get it out there? Not you have a great prototype you can demonstrate in the lab, but you actually have priced it appropriately, designed it appropriately, it's ruggedized, it's going to work in different types of settings. Those are the things I think that investors, partners, manufacturing partners, distributors, they're going to be looking for in a prototype is, are you really solving those kind of key metrics? And so when we created that statement, it was really meant with, what do we think is going to make you a viable product at the end that people are going to care about investing in, supporting, distributing. Nope, you're
Totally.
muted.
Thanks, I stopped sharing instead of unmuting. But yeah, no, totally, that's fantastic. And it I think it makes it that much easier when you've got this kind of niche market where there's a pathway that makes sense. There are the people, the players that are all involved, very valuable technologies, opportunities. As I mentioned, I come from a family of first responders. Both my husband and my father are firefighters. So I actually have a unique lens on the problems that they face as well. So I'm excited to get to know some of the teams and what they're actually working on too. And yeah, just continue to de-risk that investment in any way that applies.
So we're not seeing any further questions here. So I think we can give it about 30 more seconds. If anybody has a question, post it fast. And if not, we'll wrap up for today.
And thank you everybody for your time and for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. We're looking forward to it. So folks, we wait to see if any last question comes in. Some of you have been participating in administrative office hours and technical office hours, and at least mentioned that we'll start also offering some commercialization office hours. And the purpose of these different types of office hours is to make experts available to you, members of our team available to you. We'll be offering other folks in the technical space and other things to start coming into those as well. So our plan is to start having regular, every week, having multiple office hours available for different types of expert, different types of input that you may need as a team. There may be time periods where you don't need commercialization help, but then you're really focused in on it, or you have a team member who is, and now you have the ability when those are advertised to call in and then ask questions of folks who have some level of expertise in helping you solve that problem. So that's an important part of our programming, is in addition to webinars, is just giving you a chance to ask questions and interact with someone in a more casual setting. I think we don't see any more questions here. So, oh, well, there is one more question. Sorry. Well, it says here I had another question. Oh, here it is. Open. Sorry.
See it. Lost my reception, rejoined, missed the answer. That's okay. I have a couple minutes. We can recap really quickly. Glad to know you're so engaged, Michael, of course. And one of the jobs that we do here at GBeta and genor8tor, I like to think of us as kind of the network connectors. We will always make any connections that we can for you across those industries. I know the 5G program is kicking off next month, and there may be some specific kind of sponsors that we work with that contractually only offer their services during that cohort to the participants as well. But any outside just relationships that we have that we can get you plugged into, we will of course do that.
And we'll be working from the first side and working with NIST and PSCR and FirstNet Authority and other folks to bring other connections, not just 5G, but other connections from the industry to the teams as well as part of our broader programming. Some of it may be working through the generator work, others may be things we're just doing naturally as part of our general programming. So I think that 5G cohort's a good one. Saw it when it was advertised, and it looks like you got a good program there, and hopefully this will be a good parallel program to that. So